Colombian social movements have denounced the repression unleashed against demonstrators outside the Romelio Martinez Olympic Stadium in the city of Barranquilla as the nationwide anti-government demonstrations continue. In Chile, final preparations are underway for the elections to be held this May 15th and 16th, which will see Chileans elect the members of the Constitutional Convention, as well as regional and local authorities. The Israeli attacks against Gaza continue as people across the world express their solidarity with Palestinians, and the resistance movement mobilizes to defend Palestine. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, and I'm Katrina Goss. Colombian social movements and leaders denounced the repression unleashed against demonstrators on Wednesday outside the Romelio Martinez Olympic Stadium in the city of Barranquilla. According to protesters, the repression perpetrated by agents of the Mobile Anti-Riot Squadron came as hundreds of young people gathered outside the stadium to demand the suspension of a match for the Libertadores Cup due to the dramatic humanitarian crisis and repression in the country. The squadron launched tear gas and stun grenades at demonstrators while the first half of the match was being played inside the stadium. The peaceful rally took place within the framework of the national strike action, which entered its 16th day across the country this Thursday, calling for a change in a socio-political model currently in place in Colombia, an end to the escalating violence, and a reduction of the deep social inequality. Despite calls from leaders and populist sectors for a broad, transparent and inclusive dialogue, President Iván Duque maintains his position of intensifying the deployment of police anti-riot forces and the army on the streets. Colombian lobbyists and business owners, as well as other allies of President Iván Duque, discussed actions that the private sector could implement within the framework of the ongoing national strike due to their concerns regarding the loss of profits. Colombian newspaper El Espectador disclosed information regarding a meeting held on Sunday, May 9th by a group of politicians from the Democratic Center Party and business owners from Pereira City with the purpose of finding a solution to the 10-day standstill of their businesses. According to the report, several Congress members dismissed the option of dialogue with the protesters, describing them as terrorists. They instead proposed further militarization and to pressure the media to follow the narrative depicting protesters and indigenous groups as violent. High-ranking officials linked to former President Álvaro Uribe suggested threatening the media with a funding cut if they continue to report police abuses and ordering media outlets to refer to acts of violence and looting perpetrated by Venezuelan residents in Colombia.
Las autoridades registran al menos 24 muertos, mientras ONGs denuncian que la policía ha disparado contra...
And this Thursday, a massive popular assembly is being held in the Colombian city of Cali, promoted by the National Strike Committee as part of the activities on the 16th day of mobilizations against the government of President Iván Duque. After another night of police repression, activists, social movements and organisations making up the National Strike Committee will analyse the evolution of the demonstrations in the country and evaluate the progress of their demands as issued on April 28th. The initiative comes after the failed talks between President Duque and representatives of the Strike Committee on Monday due to the government's refusal to hear the population's demands. Despite this, the Strike Committee reiterated its willingness to negotiate with the government as long as the violence against demonstrators stops and a process is established to comply with the demands voiced in the mobilizations. And Colombia's Foreign Minister, Claudia Blum, has resigned as the country is immersed in one of the biggest social and political crises of recent years. The minister did not specify the reasons for her departure in the resignation letter submitted to President Iván Duque, but stated that the decision was irrevocable and effective immediately. Blum's resignation followed that of Finance Minister Alberto Carrasquilla, who resigned earlier this month following the widespread protests against the tax reform proposed by Duque. Local media and opposition parties said the foreign minister's resignation was inevitable, given the violence unleashed against protesters by security forces, acts that have been strongly condemned by the international community. On Thursday, Pope Francis received President of Argentina Alberto Fernandez at the Vatican in an audience where the two leaders discussed the pandemic, vaccines and Argentina's foreign debt. President Fernandez is visiting Italy on the last stage of a tour of several European countries to garner support for the renegotiation of Argentina's debt with the International Monetary Fund. After the conversation between the two, the Pope spoke with family members and the presidential entourage, and gifts were exchanged. President Fernandez met with the Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, as well. The Argentine president was set to meet with Italian President Sergio Mattarelli and Prime Minister Mario Draghi later on Thursday to secure their support in the renegotiation of the country's debt with the Paris Club and the IMF. According to an anonymous U.S. official, the nation's largest fuel pipeline network, Colonial Pipeline, paid a ransom of almost $5 million to hackers after the company fell victim to a sweeping cyber attack that sent Americans in the southeastern United States scrambling to find fuel as stations ran out of gas. Earlier on Thursday, President Joe Biden declined to comment when asked if Colonial Pipeline had paid the ransom. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters during a briefing that it remains the position of the federal government to not pay ransoms, as it may incentivize cyber criminals to launch more attacks. The supply crunch sparked panic buying, bringing long lines and high prices at gas stations ahead of the peak summer driving season. The average national gasoline price rose to above $3 per gallon, the highest since October 2014. Colonial halted 2.5 million barrels per day of shipments of gasoline, diesel and jet fuel last Friday after the most disruptive cyber attack ever on U.S. energy infrastructure. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. In Chile, final preparations are underway for the elections to be held this May 15th and 16th. In this process, Chileans will elect the members of the Constitutional Convention as well as regional and local authorities. Over 14 million voters are called to participate in these elections, where regional governors, mayors and council members will be elected, as well as the 155 members of the Constitutional Convention, the body charged with drafting a new constitution to replace that which has been in place since the Pinochet dictatorship. It should be recalled that this historic move comes as a result of the widespread massive mobilizations of Chileans from October 2019 onwards to demand fundamental changes in the country. There are more than 20,000 candidates standing. The elections, which were postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, are being held over 2 days in order to avoid crowding at polling stations. And as mentioned, Chile is preparing to hold several elections this weekend, among them a historic move to elect a constitutional convention, a body that will redraft the Chilean constitution, the same that has been in place since the Pinochet dictatorship. To discuss this, we now welcome political analyst Felipe Ramirez. Felipe, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Felipe, the fact that Chile will have a new constitution and that it will be drafted by a directly elected body is thanks to the Chilean people mobilizing on the streets and demanding change. These were mobilizations that suffered heavy state repression, for which the Piñera government has yet to answer. At the same time, despite the historic significance of this move, there are reports of apathy and a lack of awareness regarding the process among voters in Chile. In this context, what are the hopes in terms of the composition of this constitutional convention?
Well, it's really difficult to advance a result for the elections because effectively we have an apathy in a very important sector of the mobilized people. There is a sentiment that some of the left-wing parties may approach too much to the center-left parties, and the people feels that their demands are left behind of the table. So we have now a big dispersion of the vote between different lists, and it's possible that we will have perhaps just 1/3 of the seats in the convention for the left and at least 1/3 for the right wing. We have also a lot of independent candidates, and it's a really question what is going to happen with them, because they don't have the support of parties, but it's possible that they will have an important support from the voters. So I think it's possible we have dispersion of the convention, and it's going to be a really difficult process.
Felipe, there are 20,000 candidates standing for the Constitutional Convention and for the regional governor, mayor and council member elections. How are the traditional political forces of the country preparing for this vote? What old alliances are being reforged or new alliances are being drawn up? Related a little to what you were saying there about the case of independent candidates as well as traditional parties participating.
Well, I think the traditional parties, the left wing and center left, after the revolt in 2019, were really defeated. They were really struck by the manifestations, by the protesters. But I think after all this time, there is a revival of the old alliances. The center left has a really big opportunity to regain strength by this election, and the left is divided. We have at least 2 or 3 main lists from left-wing parties or left-wing activists, and also we have a different list, local and national list formed by unions and independents. So I think the right and center-left traditional parties are going to be more powerful than they have in the last year. And the left, the new left and the traditional left is divided, but they are going to be more powerful than in the last election in 2017.
Felipe, the formula of the right and centre-left has dominated Chilean politics since 1990, but the widespread protests of October 2019 were a rejection of this status quo, as you were mentioning there. However, despite this fact, a new united political force has not emerged yet from this crisis. Has this hope for real change subsided, or is it still there waiting to find its expression somehow?
Yes, I think that there was a moment between the revolt in October 2019 and the agreement, the political agreement for this constitutional process, where we saw a really united front between the left-wing political parties and mass popular organizations. But after the agreement, there were some sense of betrayed from the people, the unorganized people and mass organizations with the left-wing parties. So we now have perhaps three different groups: the traditional center-left, the new left who signed the agreement with the government for the constitutional process, and a traditional left and social movement who didn't sign the agreement, but they are going to participate now. The only chance we have to have an important influence in the convention is with a big agreement between all the left-wing parties and the mass organizations. I think after this weekend, we are going to have the opportunity to sit down in the table and made concrete agreements for the dispute of the process to write the constitution. It's difficult. There are a lot of disagreements. There are a lot of wounds, but I think it's still possible because the mobilization was too strong, and the left-wing parties know that without the confidence of the people, they are not going to have the capacity to defeat the right wing in the presidential elections at the end of the year.
Felipe, as you say there, also this election also has an impact on future elections. If this coalition, this agreement, as you say, between different left forces, mass forces in the country doesn't work out, can we expect Chileans to once again take to the streets?
Yes, of course. I think all the structural problems of the Chilean society are still there, and perhaps the pandemic only aggravated this situation. The people is suffering a really big economic crisis. The jobs are losing, and so the people is in desperation. We don't know what's going to happen this weekend, and we don't know what's going to happen in the presidential elections, because also we have this new phenomenon, perhaps, of so-called populist candidates, and they can have something to say. This weekend, we have some candidates of this tendency for the metropolitan region in the governor position. So it's difficult to know, because it's an unknown player in this situation. But it's possible, I think, to expect new mobilizations when the pandemic passed, perhaps at the end of the year, or perhaps even before the future elections. The people is going to strike, going to demonstrations.
Felipe Ramirez, political analyst, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your valuable insight into these major elections taking place in Chile this weekend. Thank you.
Thanks to you.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Palestinian resistance missiles have reportedly reached the Nevatim Israeli Air Force Base, according to Hamas's armed wing, the Qassam Brigades. Israeli media confirmed the attacks. The airbase is located in the Negev desert in the northern part of occupied Palestine. The military wing of Hamas said it has begun using a new rocket that enables it to hit any point in Israel. Hamas military chief Mohammed Deif called for international airline companies to immediately cease their flights to any airport in Israeli-occupied Palestine, a spokesperson said. According to Lebanese agency Al Mayadeen, the occupation is using internationally banned weapons against Palestinians amid pleas for the International Criminal Court to investigate the matter. The number of dead Palestinians recorded since the beginning of the latest Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip has increased to 97, including 22 children and 8 women, while the number of injuries is close to 600 and the figures continue to rise. And as the Israeli regime's attacks on Palestinians intensify, our collaborator Ahmed Ghanem brings us the latest on the situation on the ground in Gaza.
Here you can see how, as part of its aggression on Gaza, Israel has also targeted these businesses and small stores in the Gaza Strip, on the pretext that it is targeting resistance camps. But that is not the truth. See for yourself the current conditions of the stores that were preparing to sell new clothes to children on Eid, as is customary during the holiday of Al-Fitr. But these stores were completely destroyed, as can be seen in these images. The truth is that there is a monumental destruction in this place, an immense destruction. Israel justifies this destruction by saying that it is a target of the resistance. But the truth shows that this place is one of the most important markets in the Gaza Strip, and it is completely destroyed. Ahmed Ghanem from Al Mayadeen for teleSUR, Gaza Strip.
And Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas vowed to continue to do everything possible to defend the Palestinian people and stop the aggressive Israeli occupation during an emergency meeting with the Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Central Committee of Fatah.
I address my speech especially to the US and Israel. Enough is enough. Leave us. Release our hearts. We will remain a thorn in your eyes. We will not leave our homeland. We will not leave our country. We have acted on all levels in compliance with our national responsibilities, and we will continue to do everything possible to defend our people and stop this aggressive occupation from our country and our sanctities, and today we will study all our options that guarantee this. The occupying state wants to impose a colonial fait accompli in the city of Jerusalem and in all of our homeland, and for this, Israel is waging a frenzied war crimes and ethnic cleansing targeting the Palestinian presence and the Arab and Islamic identity in our capital, Jerusalem.
Palestinian crowds held Eid al-Fitr prayers in the squares of Al-Aqsa Mosque on Thursday morning, despite the Israeli authorities' repression and violent confrontations over the past few days. Those at the mosque chanted in support of the Al-Qassam brigades and the Palestinian resistance in Gaza. They also held pictures and waved flags in support of the resistance in the Strip, while calls echoed from the minarets of the mosque in support of Gaza and its people. Eid al-Fitr marks the end of the holy fasting month of Ramadan. And meanwhile, Israel Defense Forces spokesperson Brigadier General Hidai Sieberman said the Israeli military is carrying out preparations, including plans for a possible ground operation in the Gaza Strip. According to the general, the plans are currently being drawn up by the military and will then be submitted to the country's political authorities for approval. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram, plus you can watch us on our YouTube channel. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.